Hi guys, this is Andrew Burgess, and this screencast, next generation JavaScript with asynchronous module definition and require JS. So if you've been writing JavaScript for any length of time at all, you might notice that there's a bit of a small problem when you get into larger projects. And that is that organizing your JavaScript isn't necessarily very easy. You can break it up into separate files, and that makes it much easier to write. But then when you're putting it onto a page, you've got to include multiple script tags, and you've got to get them all in the right order. And even if you combine those scripts afterwards, you've got to make sure you combine them in the right order, etc., etc. And there are a couple of issues with the multiple script tags thing, beside it just being inconvenient. First of all, yes, it's easier to develop when you separate your code into multiple script files, but if any of those scripts have to interact with each other, you've got to make sure they're both included on the page, and you've got to make sure that the one that requires the other comes after the one it requires. Otherwise, it'll get executed first and may not have access to the objects that it needs. Also, when you've got multiple script files on a page, the browser, or when you have a script file on a page, the browser downloads and executes the JavaScript files, and while it's doing that, it's not doing anything else. So it's blocking the downloading of other things like HTML, CSS, and images. And that's why you've probably heard it recommended that you put your script tags in at the bottom of the body. That's for two reasons. First of all, so that all the other content will load, and this user won't kind of get a hanging blank page like they will if you put it up in the header section. In the head of your HTML document, you've got a lot of scripts. All of those have to download and execute before any of the DOM content is loaded. The other reason, of course, for doing that is so that you don't have to say wait for the document to be ready before you actually use the elements, because if you wait till they load before you loading the script tags, they'll already be loaded. And so a solution that has been proposed to this, and that I really like, is asynchronous module definition. The idea is that we have a standard way of writing a chunk of functionality, and this does two things. First of all, it makes it very easy to include other people's code in your projects, because we're all writing to the same, we're all writing our modules of code in the same way. And second of all, it makes it easier to load them onto the page, because since everyone's writing their modules in the same way, we can have a standardized way of loading them onto the page. So that's what I'm going to show you about this tutorial. Asynchronous module definition is a specification for defining JavaScript modules. But that's only really part of the solution, because after you write the JavaScript modules, you've got to load them onto the page. And that's not part of the asynchronous module definition specification. And so the idea there is that while there is a standard way to write them, we can have more than one way to load them, so different people can choose their own syntax, choose their own features. You can choose your own module loader, and you're really only changing a small percent of your code, because the loading of the modules is a small percent of what you're actually doing. And meanwhile, for a lot of module loaders, the code behind the scenes might be very different, while the public API that they expose could be very, very similar. But that's enough background. We're going to look today at the require.js library, which loads AMD modules and also gives us some other neat features that are specific to the require.js library. So let me show you the website here. This is requirejs.org, and as you can see, it's a JavaScript file and module loader optimized for in-browser use, but can be used in other browser or other JavaScript environments. Let's actually make some modules. This is too much talk, and I'm going to confuse you. So let's actually make some modules. I'm going to move into my sites folder. I should show you here in the Finder. In macOS 10, the sites folder here is accessible from the browser via localhost. I have an Apache server running on the system, and I believe that you will have to have a server running, because some of the ways, because obviously we're going to be including several scripts on our little example page here, and most of them, or only one of them, will have a script tag. The rest will be loaded via XHR. So that means we're going to need a server running, and this sites folder here links up to an Apache server, and so that's what we're going to be doing. All right, so I'm in this site folder here, internal. Let me create a folder here called, or actually let me make a directory here called, we'll just call it project, and cd into that project. Okay, so let's see, I'm just going to touch on index.html file. I'm going to make two directories here, CSS and actually not CSS, just a JS folder. And let's do this. Let's make, so we're going to make a module using asynchronous module definition specification. And there are links in the tutorial to the specification wiki, so you can see exactly everything it says, but I'm going to show you about it right here. So basically, let's make a module that is going to handle the attachment and detachment of browser events, DOM events. So let's, inside of our JS folder here, I'm going to create a folder called DOM, which is just going to be like namespacing all of our DOM events. And in there, we're going to create an events, we'll call it events.js. Great. So you can see here we have a JS folder with DOM and then events in there. So in Vim, I'm going to open up our JS DOM events. All right, so here's our file. And in here, we're going to make an events module. So the way every module is defined with the define method. Now, obviously, we don't have any place, the browser doesn't give us a define method, but once we include our require.js library, we can get the module, or we'll get the method define with that. And any other module, there are several other JavaScript loaders that use the AMD specification or support the AMD specification for loading modules. And so you'll be able to use those as well. So this takes three parameters. The first two are optional, and the third one is not. So the first one is a name. The second one is a dependencies array, and I'm just using some pseudocode here. And the third one is called a factory. So what exactly do these do? Well, the first one is just a name for your module, and the general convention usually is not to give your module a name. Now, why would you not give your module a name? How are you going to use it if it doesn't have a name? And the idea is that if there's no module available already loaded into the JavaScript environment with the name of the module we are asking for, and you'll see what that means when we start asking for modules, then it looks for the file module's name. So this module is going to be called DOM/events. And we're not actually going to put it in here, but you can see because it's in the DOM folder and it's called events, that's how we would refer to that module, DOM/events. And when we do that, we'll be able to do that later. And that's how we're going to require that module. And so you'll see exactly what that means as we go along, but we're not going to have that in there right now because we're just going to leave that up to the file name. The second parameter we're not going to use right now, but it's a dependencies array. And basically a dependency is any script or other module, preferably, that this module needs to run. So for example, let's say we had another module called DOM/ manipulation or something like that. I could do that right like that. And this is obviously an array, and I can have as many modules in there as I want. And all those modules are dependencies for the event module. And that basically just means that make sure these modules have been loaded before running the code in this module. Now, if those modules were loaded by another module or loaded by default when our app was, when a user came to our website or started to using our web app, those would not be loaded a second time. Our library, in this case require.js, would notice that that had already been loaded and allow our factory to go ahead and actually run the code here. And now our factory here can either be, I'm just going to take this out, we're going to come back and we'll be using dependencies a bit later. Our factory here can be two things. It can either be a raw object literal, if that's all we need, or it can be a factory that returns an object. Or it can be a function that returns an object. That's what we're going to, well, in this case, we're just going to do an object literal. But I want to pause here and mention something. You might be familiar with the term module in JavaScript. For example, the module pattern, which you can find kind of the primary article is a blog post on the YUI blog, which I have linked to in the tutorial. This is not that pattern, even though this is called asynchronous module definition and we are defining modules. These modules it's not identically the same pattern as with that module, but it's very similar in that we have a function that returns an object and we can use closure, obviously, to access items within that function after the function's returned. So it's kind of similar in that way. Now, of course, when I say object, really, it returns any JavaScript value. So it can be either an object literal here, or it can be anything that returns a JavaScript value. So we could have a function here that returns a constructor that's going to use stuff from within this module and that kind of thing. All right, so enough talk. Again, let's actually write our module here. So this module is going to be an events module, and as such, we're going to have two functions in it. We're just going to have an add event and a remove event function. Very simple. So let's make a cross-browser add event function. How's that going to work? Well, we're going to take the element, we're going to take the event at once, and we're going to take a function to run when that event occurs. If the element has an add event listener property, better make sure I spell these right, then we're going to say this dot add event equals a new function. So basically we're redefining the function that we are in. And that's actually not what's happening in JavaScript. Basically, we're just pointing this .add event to a new function. So this function is still in memory. So we're going to have this .add event listener has an event function, and we're just going to say false because we don't want, I forget whether that's bubbling or capturing, whichever one IE doesn't support, although I know it should be false. Else, if we have element.attach event, then we know we're working with older versions of IE here. And I'm going to yank this, and actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to return the element. That's what we're going to do. All right, so let's just change this here. This should be attach event, and there's no third parameter there. And actually, IE does prefer the on sequence. Just like that. Very good. Otherwise, we're going to fall back and just use the DOM0 events. So actually, I should, oh, I got to return L here. Let's copy this again. And in here, we're just going to say, let's change all this to a square bracket, change this to a square bracket, and set that equal to the function. There we go. And we should not have that closing parentheses there. All right. There we go. Just like that. Very good. And there's, of course, there's other stuff we could do to make this a more robust event function, but that will do for example. Oh, and of course, at the very end here, we should return the calling of this dot add event, passing it the element, the event, and the function. So up until this point, we haven't actually run anything in the function. Up until this point, we haven't run anything. We've just redefined the function. So then this will call our new function to be whatever it should be. All right, that looks good. I'm just going to copy this. Whoops. I'm just going to copy this and paste it in here. And we're going to change this. If we have remove event, then this dot remove event is going to remove the event listener, just like that. If we have, change that to detach event, then detach, and this up here should be remove. And finally down here, this, we're going to just set this to null if and there we go. So basically, if element.remove event listener exists, we'll set remove event to remove the event listener. If it's a detach event, meaning we're in IE, then remove event will detach. Otherwise, we'll just set the event listener to null, and then we'll remove the event. Great. So that is a super simple module. We don't have a name for it because it's going to get the name of its kind of relative file path, which we'll discuss a bit later more in depth. It doesn't have any dependencies, and it's just a plain old object. All right. So let's open a in the JS folder that we created. I'm going to open a main.js file. This JS file is going to be our where all the action starts in our project. Now, what I'm about to show you isn't part of the asynchronous module definition spec. It's part of the requiring modules thing, which has no spec. Module loaders can do it however they want. And since this tutorial is primarily about require JS, we're going to be using require. And require just takes an array of dependencies and a function to run. It doesn't return anything like a module does, or like the define method does. So we can just, let's say we want to load the DOM events function here, or the DOM events module, and then this function here, we're going to say events. So we have an events library here. Now notice what happens here. The order in which I request these dependencies is the order in which they will be passed. Their modules will be passed to this function here. And that works the same way within define here. And we'll look at how that works in define in a moment. But notice this object here that I passed to define, notice how it's not affecting the global scope at all. That's all a parameter of define, is going to get passed to our events parameter here in this function, and we get it in here. So we don't have any touching of the global scope. For example, let's just do this. Let's do console.log events. And before we can do that, we're going to have to open our index.html file. So you can see I've got a little bit of a template going in here. We haven't downloaded the require.js script yet, so let's do that. Let's open this here. Let's go to the downloads link on the side. We just want the latest minified require.js. Let's save that. We want to save this into Andrew sites project JS, saved as require.js. Excellent. So there we go. We'll just minimize that again. We have that in there. And require.js has a really neat way to, instead of adding an extra script tag here, we can say data main using HTML5 data tag and just say we want to load the JS/main script, and that's what we're going to start off with. So require.js will load as soon as it finishes loading. As soon as it can, it's going to load the JS/main file, and you'll notice in both our main file here and in the index, we're leaving off the .js. That's not required when using asynchronous module definition. You'll notice the same thing once we look at dependencies here, and so the require.js library follows that pattern. So this should load up just fine. We should get our console.log of the events library just like that. So let's open our browser here, and I'm going to go to localhost/Andrew/ we called it just project. And so you can see we've got learning about AMD here, which is exactly what we have. And if I open our JavaScript, let's just go to the console. And you can see right here we have an object with two properties, add event and remove event. So there you go. That's exactly how we're getting this module inside of our main.js file without having to load more than one script tag onto the page. It's very easy and intuitive to understand from right within our JavaScript files. And also, without touching the global scope. So let's actually do something. I'm going to say var l equals document dot get element by ID target. We should go add an ID of target to this h1. Great. Okay. And we'll say events dot add event. We want to add a click event to this element, and what do we want to do? Well, let's just alert event module working. Just something simple for now to see if it actually works. Let's refresh the page, click this, and we don't get any alert, but we also do not get a error. Let me see. What order we want? The element, the event, and the function. That's my problem. let's change this to have the element, the event. And now, if we refresh this and click, there we go, event module working. Perfect. All right, very neat. So that's working just fine. So let's create a more complex module. Let's spice up this event module a bit because, well, our add event and remove event functions are pretty awesome. We could do something a little more cool. And that is, what if we had some sugar events, if you will, that allowed us to hook right into specific events. So we could have events.click or events.mouseover or events.mouseout, events.keypress, that kind of thing. And we could just add all those in here as literal properties of this literal object. We're going to do something a bit different. We are going to change this to be a function. And change this to v. We're just going to call this the events object. So that's now inside this function. Let's see, that ends right there. So we want to, let's actually take this whole thing here and bump that in. And then right down here at the bottom, we can, there we go. So that should, yeah, that looks fine. Now, if I was to just return events object just like that, that should still work fine just because all we've done is basically put this object in a variable and then return the variable at the end of the function. Let's just make sure. If I refresh this page, click it again, good. So that's just working fine. All right, now we want to actually do something here. So what we're going to do is I'll create an array of, I'm going to create an array. Let's see. Whoops. I'm going to create an array of, we'll just call it events array. Or no, we'll just call it events. And let's see, we want to have click. We want to have mouse over, mouse out, key press. That'll do for now, for this example. I'll have those 4 events there. And then I want to loop over the events array and add an event for each one. However, in the latest versions of JavaScript, there's an array method called forEach, which makes looping over arrays a lot easier. But earlier versions of IE don't give us access or don't have that forEach method. What can we do about it? Let's create another module. Let me flip back to the terminal here. Where am I? Okay, I'm going to make a directory called js/utils. And in here, let's open js/utils/array.js. So we're going to make a new module here that's just going to be an arrays module. That's going to be a bunch of array utilities. So let's see, how's this going to work? Well, now the arrays module, let me go here. Let me show you this. Let's just search array.prototype.forEach. This right here in the Mozilla documentation, it shows us basically it takes a callback and we get a this argument, and the callback gets passed 3 parameters, the element value, the element index, and the array being traversed. And then this will either equal our window, as it normally would, or this will equal whatever's passed in as the this argument. What we've got right here is basically a version of the function written in JavaScript that will work exactly as the function does when browsers actually support it. So we're going to use that, or a little bit of a modified version of that I've got here. So let's see, what do we want to do in here? So we're gonna load the utils/array module, whether the browser supports it or not. And so what we'll have to make the array module support using the native version, because it'll probably be a bit faster and maybe a bit safer if it's available. Otherwise, we'll fall back to our version. So let's do this. Let's say let's create a function here called native forEach, and it's going to take a list, a callback, and this argument. And actually, let's call this Sound cool. Okay. So basically in here, all we want to do is say array dot for each dot call the list, the callback, and this argument. And we'll actually return. Actually, no, this doesn't return anything, so let's not, because it just returns undefined. Great. Otherwise, we're going to have our custom for each, which is going to take the same. It's going to take a list, a callback, and a value of this. And in here, I will just paste this code that I have right here. So basically, let me show you what this does. Basically, if there's no list, the list is undefined. If the callback is not a function, we throw that error. If we have this, we set the value t to this. Otherwise, t will just be undefined. And then while k is less than length, k is 0, length is the length of the array. If k is a value in O, we set k value to the O to k, which is going to be the index of the item. And then we just pass t, which is our value for this, to the callback. And we pass in the value, the index, and O, which is the list itself, which is the same thing we're going to get passed to the callback in the native implementation. So that's pretty simple. All right, so that we have that there. So now here in our events, we want to load that up. So we want to say utils/array, and then we need a way to get to that. So in here, that'll be passed to our factory function as we're going to call it array. Great. So now down here, right here, let's see, we have, I will say array.forEach. Whoops, I forgot the most important part here. Back, and let's open that up again. Tab E, JS utils array. We have to return an object here. So we're going to return, let's return an anonymous function here that's going to invoke itself. So let's say if object.toString.call, and we're going to call it on array.forEach, if that equals object function. So basically all this says, if for each exists on arrays and it is a function, then what we're going to do is let's return our native for each. Else, we're going to return our custom for each. So this will run right away, of course, and return, no, this is wrong. What I want to do here is we want to return an object which has a for each property. There we go. So this object is being returned. Right, we'll just, whoops. And this can all be indented one. There we go. So for each here is a function that is going to be automatically or immediately invoked. If for each on arrays exists on arrays as a function, we will use the native for each. Otherwise, we will use the custom for each. All right, so back in here, now we have arrays.forEach. We're going to pass it our events list, and we have a function which is going to take one event at a time. And here we're just going to say event object. We're going to use square brackets to set the event parameter. It's going to be a function that's going to take an element and a function. And we're just going to say this dot add event, element, and function. And it's that easy. And now we can remove all this extra space here, save that. We can quit that file. And in here, now we could change this to a click. Take that out, and I think I got this wrong again. This is supposed to be the element. Oops. The element and the event. There we go. All right. And so now, let's come back here. We can close that. If I refresh this page, event object not defined on line 45. Let's see what's going on there. On line 45 here, we don't have event. That's because we called it events object. Refresh, click, and we get our pop-up. So now we have, what do we have now? We have a module that is requiring or calling in another module as a dependency. And so our events module will not be run until the utils array module has been loaded and the events module has access to it. Excellent. That's pretty much all there is to know about the asynchronous module definition spec. And we'll come back to it. We'll look at a bit more about module names a bit later on, but right now let's focus on the require.js library for most of the rest of this tutorial. And I'll show you some of the other neat features that it offers. Just remember that these are specific to the require.js library and they have nothing to do with the asynchronous module definition specification. So the first thing we want to talk about is some configuration options we have. And you can configure require.js using the method require.configure, and you pass in an object with the properties that you want. The first one we want to talk about is the base URL. Base URL is basically where the library knows to get the JavaScript files from. You'll have noticed that even though the JavaScript files are inside, let's look back here in the Finder, you can see that they're located inside the JS folder, inside subfolders like this, and it knew where to get them. And that's because when we use, over here, when we use the data-main HTML5 data attribute on the script tag and it's loading js/main, what require.js will do is it will set the base URL to the same place that the main script is in. If we didn't do this, for example, we don't have to put this in this way. We could leave it like that, and then in here we'll set script source, and we're going to say js/main.js, so that after JS require is loaded, we're going to load JS main. Let's see what happens. If we come back here, refresh the page, look at a get request was made. We have project/dom/events 404 not found. It didn't realize that it doesn't automatically set the same folder that the js.main file is in, or that the file that we begin requiring stuff from. And of course, well, you say that's because you're resetting it right here. Okay, let's delete that and make sure that it would do the same thing. Yes, you can see it's doing the same thing even though I had that in there. So what we can do, if you want to load main in its own script tag that way, is in here we set what it is. So we're just going to say /js, or we could even do /. Actually, no, let's just do JS. And now, if I refresh the page, you'll notice everything is loading fine, and we're getting our little event action because it now knows that / to look in the JS folder inside of from the folder that the index.html file is in. So that's the base URL. And we could even do a ./js just to make sure that it knows the folder the index.html file is in, or basically the root folder of the project, /js. Okay, so what else do we have? We have paths. This is pretty neat. Because first of all, well, you'll notice that when we require things here, and this works in, you'll notice that when we require a module here, we're using its path, partially, based off the base URL, and we're leaving off the .js. But we could actually require something else. So for example, let's get the jQuery. Actually, no, I think I have it. Let me see, jQuery. Yes, there we go. Copy that. So here's the jQuery Google CDN. We've got that right now. This script is not a module, so there's not going to be anything passed to this function when I use it. But nevertheless, it will be loaded, and since it uses the global namespace, I'll have access to it. And as you can see, if I'll be able to do console.log jQuery when I load the page here. Whoops, what did I do? Oh, I have this open paths here. Let me just get rid of that for now and get rid of that comma. There you can see that we have the jQuery function being loaded. So that loads jQuery just like that. But doesn't that look kind of ugly? We've got this great big long path in there. Well, everything else is going to be short, beautifully namespaced modules once you're requiring a bunch of them, of course. So what we can do is use paths. And paths is an object. And basically, all we do is we pass in how we want to be able to access it. So we could say something like libs/jQuery, and then how we actually really have to access it. And I should make it clear here that you have to take off the file extension, otherwise it's going to look for a .js file. So take it off, take the file extension off, and it's going to end with just jQuery.min. And then down in here, we don't have to use this long ugly path. We can just say libs/jQuery. And so if we want to load a library, we can just do it like that. Unfortunately, this doesn't work for partial paths, so we couldn't say that just have jQuery here and then have libs/jQuery here, even if libs was a real folder. You've got to have the whole path up here and the whole path down here. Or for example, if we had a libs folder and we had jQuery.min.js, we couldn't set jQuery to jQuery.min and then just say libs/jQuery. That's probably a better example of what I was trying to say there. And of course, I can show you here that jQuery is still going to exist when we are loading it via a path alias, just like that, alias, however you say that word. All right, so what else do we have? Let's see, there's another one here. There are several, but most of them aren't going to be too useful to you, but you can have wait seconds, the number of seconds you want it to wait before a script times out. So basically the number of seconds you want it to wait before it decides the server is not going to respond with a script. By default, that is 7 seconds, but if you need to, you can up that. Okay, so now let's talk about something that's pretty neat, and that is require.js plugins. So require.js has a plugin architecture, and there are a couple of plugins. We're just going to talk about one of them here, and that is the text plugin. So the text plugin, well, let's go download it from the require.js site. If we go to downloads here, you'll find plugins. Here's the text plugin. Let's download the Minify. I'm going to save that, and we're just going to save it into the same JS folder. Okay, just like that. So basically, what the text plugin does is it allows us to require modules that aren't written in JavaScript, that are written in text. So for example, if you want to build out a chunk of the DOM, you don't have to do that in JavaScript. You can do that in your HTML and then require that HTML file. Do that in a separate HTML file. I like doing this. I like to use this to use libraries, to use templating libraries. So you don't have to include the template in a text/template script tag in your HTML file, and you don't have to include it as a string in your JavaScript file. Just include it as a separate HTML file. So I'm actually going to open this up again, and I'm going to go download the _.js library because it does a bit of templating, and we're going to use it. Let's download the production version here, and I'm going to save this into, I want to create a new folder here that we're just going to call libs, and we have _-min. Very good. Now, I actually just want to require this with underscore. So we're going to set that to _-min. Oops, min. There we go, like that. And then we're going to change this to libs-_. Okay. So let's see. So I'm going to create a, let me just get rid of this code for now. In here, I'm going to create a context object. Well, before I fill in the object, let me show you how this is going to work. So basically, let's come back here to the terminal, and we're going to make a directory called js/templates. And then in here, in that js/templates, we're going to make a template. We're going to call it list.html. So this is just going to be some HTML. We're going to have an unordered list here. And then what we're going to do, we're using the mustache.js templating engine, which is very similar to ERB if you've used that. So we're going to say _.each, and we're going to go over the people object. And we're going to have a function here. We're going to take their job and their name. And then we close the templating function there. If you're not familiar with using the _.js templating function, you can see it's pretty simple. It's basically identical to ERB if you're familiar with Ruby at all. But basically, you can see we open this function up here, and then we close it down here. Anything in here will be done for each object in the middle. So we're going to say list item, and then we're just going to have let's open a strong tag, and in the strong tag we're going to put their let's put their name, colon, actually let's close the strong tag, colon, and then we're going to include their job. Just like that. So that is our template. Now back here in main.js, this context object is going to be passed in with the template string to the _.template function. And so you saw here we were talking about a people's object that we're iterating over in here. That people's object, or people object, is going to be a member in this, or a property in this constant context array. So basically all the properties of this array become variables inside of our list.html. So let's just say Frederick is going to be our back-end developer. So now in here, what are we going to do about this? We're just going to say okay, let's do this. Let's say get that element. We're going to say document.getElement by ID again. Get that target, and we should actually share that variable. Call, no need to have two separate var statements. So we have that element. Now we want to connect two events to that element. So we're going to have, first let's create a function. Whoops. We're going to create a function called addList. And in this function, we're going to say, we're going to create a div. Let's do that outside the function though. We're going to create a div, and we're going to say div.innerHTML is going to equal _.template, and then we pass the list template, which we need to pull in, and then we pass the context. So let's create our other variables here. So we're going to have a div, which is just a document.create element div. We're going to create a div just like that. Our list template, we need to pull that in up here. So let's pull in that module, and that's within templates/list. And when using text, you have to include the file extension, and you also have to include text exclamation point. So that's how most of the require.js plugins work. So text exclamation point will tell it that we want to use this text plugin here. Now I'll show you a bit later what exactly this text plugin is doing, because it's pretty intuitive once you look at it, and I'll show you once we get there. But basically this just says use the text plugin to load templates/list.html, and we're going to get that as a string back here, and so we're just going to call that list TPL for template. And if I can spell list right. And so now down in here, we have this div here. We're just going to set that div.innerHTML equals the contents of the template. Then we're going to say document.body.insert after. We want to insert the div after that h1 element that we have. And then we want to say events.remove event listener actually it's just remove event. We want to remove this click event handler from this element with the add list method function right there. So basically, then down here we want to have, so let's say add events.add event. We want to add a click event to that element for add list. So what this is going to do basically is when we click the element, we're going to add that, we're going to render the content in the template, append it to the document. And actually, that's what I could just do there, just append, but we'll just keep that the way it is, and then remove the event so that continual clicks will not continue to add it to the document. Because then we're going to have another events here, and this one will just say events.click to show us using both. When we click the element, what will we do? We will, we're going to need another variable up here. We're going to say, this variable will be showing, and it's going to be false to start with. We will say div.style.display equals, depending on showing, if showing is true, then we're going to set this to none. Otherwise, if showing is false, we're going to set it to block. And then we're going to set showing to the opposite of showing. So since it's a Boolean, we can just convert it like that. All right, now if I haven't made any mistakes, all this should work. So basically, when we click it, two events are going to fire the first time we click that element. Number one, the content will be added. Number two, we're going to show the element. It'll already be showing, but we'll just set display to block. The next time we click it, this will have been removed the first time we click it, so only this event handler will remain. It'll be true, so we will set it to none, and basically it'll toggle showing it back and forth. So let's see if we were able to do that without making any mistakes. Refresh the page, and we have an uninspected token on line 33. Oh, that's right, we need to have our closing quote there, so that's a good sign that we got all the way to there without a mistake. Let's refresh this. All right, so we click it, and nothing happens. All right, let's do a little debugging here. Well, let's see. Is anything happening inside the DOM? Let's close that. No. Okay. Nothing's happening in there. Let's see. Well, is this being called? We can do that just by saying console.log hi. Is this method even getting called? No, that method's not getting called. How about this one? Yes, that one is getting called. And I guess we should change what they say just to make sure we've got different methods we're talking about here. Yeah, so our hi method's not going. Okay, so add list is not. So our problem here is probably in the order of the elements. What it's supposed to be the element and then the event. So we have the element, and then we have the click. And now, great, at least we're getting that uncaught error. HTML body has no insert after. Right, duh, that should be insert before. Which isn't what we want. We don't want it to insert before. So we're just actually going to change it to append child, and we take out that second element. There we go. All right. So L is not defined. Where's L? L is not defined in events.js 23. Oh, huh. LEVTFN. That means we got to change the order here as well. Element click. All right. There we go. So now we click it. And there we go. It's showing. And so you can see here that basically our little object here is changing, we're using this HTML template here to display it. And we don't have to put this template as a string inside our JavaScript. We don't have to put it as some extra script of type text/template inside of our HTML. We can put it in a separate file, load it via required.js text plugin, and we are good. I think that's pretty neat. So there are other plugins that you can check out. There are plugins to load scripts in specific order, because even you might think at first that these scripts are loaded in a specific order here. They're not necessarily loaded in order. They're just required. These scripts are not supposed to have each other as dependencies necessarily. And so these scripts, I mean, if one of these, for example, if DOM events was a dependency of lib/_, would not be loaded till that was loaded, because inside the lib/_ module file, DOM events would be required. But the way we have it here, the order that they're passed here to this array doesn't imply that's the order they're loaded in. So there's a plugin to load in order. There's a plugin to work with CoffeeScript files. There's other plugins, and you can check those out. But now we're going to move on to talk about the optimization tool. So as we've seen, using asynchronous module definition in require.js can make our development a lot easier, but we've got a bunch of files here, and that's going to slow us down when we actually want to load the page. So require.js or requirejs.org has an optimization tool that will that we can use, and it's recommended that you put this into a build script, or you put the calling of their optimization tool script into your own build script and add it as part of your project deployment, something like that. We're just going to look at using the build script on its own. Now, you're going to need either Node.js installed, or you're going to need to do this with Java and Rhino. Trust me, you don't want to do it with Java and Rhino. There is a world of hurt waiting for you if you should try to do that. You can find instructions on the optimization tools GitHub wiki or GitHub README, which you can get links to in the tutorial. However, we are going to be using Node.js because it's super simple to install, and there are plenty of tutorials that will help you install it on whatever platform you're using. So you'll see here that I do indeed have Node installed on my system, and let's get to work. So basically, what this optimization tool is going to do two things. First, it's going to, if we choose, it will minify our JavaScript using the uglify.js library. If we choose to, it will combine them into, combine certain scripts together into single files, and we'll look at that in more detail in a moment. And it can also optimize your CSS by removing comments and inlining any import calls to other files. It's supposed to be able to also minify your CSS, as in take out white space, although right now I'm finding that that's not working for me. So we're not going to look at that right now. So now you can download the optimization tool. The optimization tool is just a bit, where is it here? It's up here. Right here. r.js is the simple file right here. It's just this one JavaScript file, and we're going to run that on the command line. Now you can put that wherever you want. As you may have noticed earlier, I have it just right here in our sites folder, r.js. So you can optimize single files at a time. We're going to optimize our whole project at once. And to do that easily and with the most skill, we're going to create, inside of our JS file folder, let's come back here to MacVim. We're going to create a file called app.build.js. That's kind of the recommended, or the convention shown on the require.js website. So we're going to create an app.build.js, and it's basically just going to be a JSON file with an object in it, and we're going to wrap that object in parentheses. So let us look at what we need in here. So the first thing we're going to have is the app.dir, which is the directory of the app that we're working on, or the site. Our project directory is one up from the directory we're in. So we're going to go // What you'll find is that all the paths in the app.build.js file are relative to the file's location. So if you were to move the file to a different folder, you'd have to change these paths. So the app directory is one folder up from the folder that this is in. Base URL, we talked about the base URL earlier, but realized that because when we're building the script, or when we're running the build script, the app itself isn't run, the base URL is never set, and so we have to choose that base URL, and that is the current folder, so 1./ any paths that we have set need to be set in here as well, because those are not followed. So we want to say, let me just see here, we have, I can just yank that and paste that there to keep that straight. And modules. Now this is an array, and it's an array of all the modules we want to optimize. Now what does it mean to optimize a module? Basically, all it means is that we're going to include all of the dependencies of that module and any dependencies that any dependencies have. All of those scripts will be all concatenated into one file. So we're going to use, so we pass a little object here that's going to name, and we're going to name our module, and the module is going to be main. Now you might be saying two things. First here, why an object when there's only one property on it? Why not just pass the string name? Second of all, main isn't a module. It's a call to require. And you're right, it is a call to require. However, we can optimize it in the same way, and you'll see there is a little bit of a side effect, but basically it will include these modules here that we call. It will include those into all in that main file, and we'll look at how that works. As to why it's an object instead of a string, it's an object because you can pass other parameters specific to that module. For example, we could do an include. We could have include and pass an array of modules that we want also to be included in main, even though they are not dependencies of main. And so those modules, any of their dependencies will be included. Or we could use exclude, and we could exclude any modules that would otherwise be included in main because main requires them. For example, if you know that module 1 is going to be both required in, well, let me show you here. So for example, if we had, let me just do it down here. If we had modules, and this is an array, so we have a module that we have named mod1. Oops. And we also had a module named mod2. And let's say they both required a module named mod3, we could exclude mod3 here from module 2 because we know it will already be loaded in the environment after module 1 has been the module 1 file has been loaded. Module 3 will already be in the environment, therefore we don't need to load it again in module 2, or we don't need to include it in module 2 as well. We don't have any of that kind of complexity right now, so we're just going to have our modules like that. The other important one is the dir, and this is the directory that the build project will be put into. So our main project is not going to be affected at all. Everything will be copied, and we're going to, so let's say that's, we have up one to our main. Let's go up another one, and then we're just going to call it sample-build, just like that. All right, very good. What we could do, just to look at how our CSS is going to work here, although we don't have any CSS, let me come here to the terminal, and we're going to make a directory just called CSS. And we could do this, let's say tab css/main.css, and in here we could just say, let's do at import, we're going to import, let's just say, I don't know, custom.css, for example. And then in here, we're going to say h1 is going to have a color of red, we'll just say. And then we can have css/custom.css. And in here, we will say body. And in here in the body, we'll just say background dash color is going to be blue, index.html. terribly ugly, I know, but there you go. We can see we have blue and red. So our style sheets here are loading. We have main.css, which is loading custom. Our custom main right here, URL custom. Sorry, I forgot to put the URL there. All right. So, and you'll see how that works too. But let's, let me double check our app build here. Yeah, I think that's good. All right, let's come back here to the terminal. You're going to run node. You're going to do your path to your r.js file. Then you're going to say -o. In this case, it's js/app.dir build.js. Let's see what we get. Module path does not exist. Path is relative to. Okay, and the problem here is that our base URL here should be /js. So this is taken from the app directory. The app directory is right here. Base URL is taken as off of the app directory, so in the app directory /js. All right, there we go. Let's try this again. So, all right, so here we got it. We start by optimizing. We have standard.keepLines here, and then we have tracing for dependencies. We'll talk about CSS in a minute here. So it pulls all those dependencies in, or it's tracing for those dependencies. You see we're uglifying all these files, and then JS main now has the contents of all those files in that order. So you'll notice that's the order that they are required in, right? So we have the first file that's required in main.js is DOM events, but it requires array utils, or utils array, so that is concatenated above DOM events. The next one is this text template /list. So we pulled in the text template first, _.min is our last requirement, and then we have the actual main.js. And we're going to take a look at our new main.js file here in a minute. But let me talk about the CSS here. Notice we didn't say anything about CSS in our app.build.js file. It just found some CSS files and minified them. And if we go back here, you can see we now have this sample build. And if I were to look at main.css, you can see how it's pulled in the CSS declarations that were in our custom.css file. And you'll notice custom is still here. All the files are still going to be here, but the ones that are concatenated in are there, but they're not going to be required anymore. They're not even going to be pulled in because they'll be available from right within main.js. Okay, now notice here we're optimizing via standard.keepLines. If what we could do here is add a rule called optimize CSS, and we could just say standard, which would not keep lines. For example, because when it says standard.keepLines, standard is remove comments, import inline import statements, but don't remove white space. However, if we wanted it to remove white space, we would just use standard. But the problem here is that, let me come back here to our sample build file, delete that. The problem is that when I include optimize CSS standard, it's not working for me. As you'll see right here, it's still doing standard with keep lines. So, and yes, I'm sure I have the property name spelled correctly. Well, maybe I'm not. Let's double check. Let's go to the require.js. Actually, let's go to github.com / what's his name? J Burke is the guy who writes it, / r.js, we'll say. Let me see if I got that right. Didn't. Okay. Let's just go to /J Burke. Is that? Oh, no, I'm totally thinking of the wrong guy, I guess. Okay, let's just search r.js here on GitHub. I'm pretty sure it was J Burke, though. J.R. Burke. There we go. Oh, well. And we have example build right here. So you can see if we come down right here, we have optimize CSS. Standard keep lines, or none, skip CSS. So I'm going to copy that right there because I'm pretty sure I was spelling it correctly. Right here, paste that in. Oh, look at that. Ha 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 ha. The SS and CSS is not capitalized. Okay. Let's see if that fixes my problem. Kill sample build there. Come back here. Clear that. Run it. Ooh, look at that. Just use standard. If we come back over here. In here, let's look at the main. Yes, it took out the white space. Wow. Awesome. Okay. See, I'm learning something even as I teach you this. That's probably not too reassuring for you guys, but as you'll see, it's a pretty small mistake. I accidentally capitalized the SS in CSS, which you should not do. So there you go. If you want to, you've got something else there. You've got standard, which inlines, comment removal, and line returns. They have a little warning here that removing line returns may affect IE in some way with some types of CSS. I'm not sure what that means, but I don't think you'll have a problem with that because most people do that. Standard.keep lines, like standard, but keeps line returns, and then none will just ignore your CSS. All right, so now we're just about done here, but I want to show you what that did to our main.js file. So let's open this with Vim. And as you can see, it most definitely has been minified. But what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to do a bit of a search here, and we're going to search for define open parentheses quote, and we're going to replace that with a return, and then define open parentheses quote. And I think you'll, excellent. And I'm also going to take off line wrapping. All right. So now look at what we've got here. This is basically the contents of our current new main.js file. We start with the utils array. We've got DOM events, text here, text template. Now what you can't see is that right after the text template here, right here, we have our entire call to, that is the entire underscore.js library. You're wondering what the long line above it is. That is the text plugin. But this right here, this really long line, is the underscore.js library. And now you're going to notice something else really strange here. Here's our require statement, or require config, and then here is our require statement. But look at this. We've got define libs underscore. We've got a module definition for a libs slash underscore, and then right down here we've got define main. I believe this is part of using telling it to bring in all, like, optimizing in, well, let me bring it back here. And here when we say modules, main isn't actually a module, so I think the inclusion of this main module has something to do with that. Even though main is not a module, this has something to do with that. Also, when we require underscore.js here in main, it looks like this main module here is created, just this blank module is created. I haven't looked into this very much, but I'm guessing the reason this is made here is so that in here, when lib underscore is required, it doesn't go looking for that very file because the module's inlined here. And that's something I completely glossed over here. Notice all these modules now have names because they're within this file. So in here in our require statement, when we require the DOM events module, it's going to see, oh, there was a module that is named DOM events that was already loaded. I don't have to go look for a file inside a DOM folder named event. And so there you go. Okay, well, there are a couple of other things that I have, a few kind of grab bag items that you can check out at the end of the written portion of the tutorial. And there's really a lot more that I could teach you with asynchronous module definition require JS. But I'm sure what you've gotten so far is more than just a good grip of the basics. So I recommend, if you're interested in this topic, you check out, I have a couple of links, a list with a couple of links in it at the end of this tutorial for further study on your part. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, you can either email me at andrew8088@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at andrew8088, or on the Tuts Plus Marketplace. You can find my profile, and you can submit an email to me through there, and I will do my best to help you out with whatever your problem is. Thanks so much for watching.